All right, let's start the clock. 20-minute sprint session. 20 minutes in, 20 minutes out. For those of you who have not been here before, the rules of the game are pretty simple. It is pure protein content. So we live up to our name. 20-minute sprint. That means we get in, we get smarter, we get out, and we get back to selling in just 20 minutes. Nate and I are going to hang around for another 10 minutes here, answer some questions. I'm really delighted that he's on board with us today. If you don't know him already, Nate Nasrallah is co-founder and CEO of Fluent. They are changing the game for helping us on the front lines maintain customer conversations, build great enablement material to connect deals along and really make it buyer-centric. Topic today that we're going to get right from that big brain that Nate has here. He's going to share with us all of the magic behind crafting a compelling business case. If you're not doing this effectively right now, the value that this can have on your reputation with the client, your progression and momentum in the deal, and obviously your win rate is overwhelming. So we're going to jump right in here, Nate. I got a ton of questions for you. I want to crack open as much as we possibly can. Love to start at the end, actually, and work backwards from there. When you think of a compelling business case, what does the finished product look like? Before we get into the components of what to do and how to do it, what does a great business case look like?
So a couple key pieces. One, it's concise. I look for a one-page business case. Anything longer than that, the likelihood that it actually gets read and used, especially at an executive level, which is who you're ultimately writing to, it plummets. So concise, clear. Second, it's collaborative. You can't build a business case alone. It has to have your champion's fingerprints all over it. So think of it as a co-created finished product. And then third, it's camouflaged in the sense that you're using internal language. It looks and feels unique or different for every single deal in your pipeline. If your finished product is too similar account to account to account, and you can recycle the content, you're not done yet. You need to go even deeper. So clear and concise, collaborative, and camouflaged.
Okay, the 3 C's of a great business case here. We're going to have to get into how to do this effectively. I have tons of questions. For those of you who are with us here, just joining in, if you have questions, again, we're going to be on for 10 minutes after the fact. If we don't get to all of your questions, jump into our community. We have a link here I just put in the chat. You can jump in, get into the community. I'll answer any questions after the fact, or I'll hunt Nate down to answer them as well. We got a lot to unpack here. So when we talk about first, concise. So let's go back to the beginning now that we know what the finished product looks like. What are some of the things that AEs and reps really need to take into consideration before the next deal? Let's forget about the ones that were already late stage. We're chasing deals down at the end of a quarter now.
Right.
Before that next one starts, what are some of the things that we have to have front of mind?
Yeah, so there's a couple pieces. One, when you go deep on practicing writing and creating business cases, you'll realize where pieces of your discovery are too shallow. When you start with a framework and you're trying to kind of fill it in, build it out, you're like, oh crap, I don't actually have the information that I need in order to go deep on writing this. So first thing to keep in mind is the quality of your business case is directly linked to the depth of your discovery. The second thing to keep in mind is you always want to lead with actually exactly what you did to start, Matt. Put your bottom line up front. What is the recommendation, the action that you're suggesting somebody could take? And what is the good or bad outcome? Good if they do follow that suggested action. Bad outcome if they just kind of let the problem continue. And usually what this means is you are starting with just a 2 to 3 sentence soundbite. And you're trying to frame up your point of view on what is that soundbite for this client, uniquely or in particular. And then third thing that I would keep in mind is you want to attach to and align with an internal project or priority very quickly. A lot of us as sellers go deep onto the things like discovering problems, quantifying those, great. But sellers lose deals all the time, even when they find a genuinely costly problem, because they are not attached to or aligned with a priority that an executive is already sold on. So what are people already spending time and money on internally that you can align your business case toward? So you do those 3 things early in the cycle, then building out the business case with your champions through the rest of the cycle will come along much more effectively.
That's gold. So what are some of those gems that you've seen either through your career or with clients that you're currently working with, those amazing questions that really start to suss out a lot of that business case fodder that you're really going to want to hear along the way?
Yeah, so let me give you an example of a recent deal that I was working on over the last month and a half, 2 months. And it gets to this point of selling to priorities, not just problems. So one of the questions that I asked early was, hey, when you're talking to the sales organization, we work with sales teams. When you're talking to the sales org and you are referencing this thing that you all are working on, like what's the phrase that goes in calendar invites? And is there on meeting agendas any way that you would refer to this? And they're like, oh yeah, the next gen GTM. I was like, okay, next gen GTM, that's interesting. Tell me more about that. And then we unpacked what they were looking for and what they were moving toward in this next generation go-to-market strategy, which we're able to enable with the work that we do at Fluent. And so everything that I wrote, the executive summary, the full-on business case, future follow-up emails, what was right in the subject line or the headline, next gen GTM. And it's an immediate signal like, hey, I understand and I'm aligned to the thing that you care about. And it makes it very easy for a champion to forward this around internally. So one practical example from a recent deal that you can, one, I would ask that, like try that in some of your discovery conversations, and then you can roll that through into your writing as well.
Something that it seems obvious, but until you read it somewhere. So I've been poking around Fluent site quite a bit lately, and until you read it somewhere, it's not really top of mind. 90% of sales happen when the sales rep is not there, not involved in the conversation. They're taking place behind closed doors at the client's operation, in their boardroom, in their conference room. How do you recommend, in terms of building this business case, that we collaborate with a champion, collaborate with a mobilizer? For those of you who are fans of the Challenger series, how do you recommend that we really sync up with them along the way?
Yeah, there are two analogies that I would give you for this. And the big idea is you want to start this as early as possible from the point of your very first discovery conversation. So the first analogy is Mad Libs. Has anybody played that game, Mad Libs, or do you have any kids that play Mad Libs? It's mostly a US game. So if you're joining from outside of the US, I'll show you an image of what this looks like. And Matt, if you want to let me share my screen, I'll pull up a little visual for everybody. And the basic idea is Mad Libs is this game where it gives you a story outline, kind of the framework for creating a story. And it's kind of like a fill in the blanks type process where you insert different pieces as you go. So this is what it looks like insert an adjective, a verb, a color, so on here. This is what building a business case is like. You're starting with a point of view on, okay, these are the things that I want to understand. And in my discovery, I'm pulling out in my buyer's language, how they would talk to their own team. I can fill in the framework. I'll go through and I'll give you the framework that you can use for this. But that's the first point. It's on you to guide your champions through this process. The second analogy that I would give you is IKEA. Has anybody put together IKEA furniture before?
I've got my nightmare stories from that, sure.
Okay. Now, what IKEA figured out is people take a greater sense of ownership and they value the things that they create more highly than what somebody else does for them. And this goes back to the earlier point of it has to be collaborative. So what you'll do, let's say you end that first discovery call, you have a framework for how you want to spell out a problem statement, just to say, hey, are we on the same page? This is the thing to solve. And does everybody on the buying team agree with us? What you do is you draft that. Hey, based on what I heard you share, it sounds like this is the most important thing to address and align on with your team. What would you change about this? What have I missed? What's important that maybe just didn't come up in the conversation? Get their input, comments, rewrites, edits, and then get it to a place where they want to go and present this to their team. Hey, guys, we've been letting this slide. We haven't put enough time and investment into it. I'd like to hold a meeting and a conversation about solving for this. And I've asked Matt to join. He works with a number of different customers in our industry doing this, addressing this same problem, right? So from the get-go, you're involving them in the process. Think about IKEA furniture. By the time you go through the pain of building that out, you're like, man, if I were to resell this or list it, like I need pretty much as close to what I spent on it because I poured so much sweat equity into this thing. Same type idea. You want your champions to build a sense of ownership along the way. So Mad Libs, filling out your framework and then building it like IKEA furniture.
So interesting. And, there's that old adage of tell me and I forget, teach me and I might remember, involve me and I learn. And we need more of that collaborative process if we're really going to help move the needle and really capitalize on that process of take control, educate, move the needle of working with clients. We talked a lot about what great looks like. Tell us some of the nightmare stories. So just my history of IKEA, I automatically thought of stuff that I poorly put together. What are some of the things that you've seen salespeople poorly put together when it comes to making an effort? Obviously, the worst case is you don't do anything, right? You don't make any effort. But what are some of the bad attempts that are the cautionary tales that you've seen out there?
Okay, so here's a recent one. It goes back to this idea of using internal language, code names, project names, sometimes what I'll call trigger phrases. A rep learned a internal project name that was a riff, meaning the whole project was to reduce headcount, to lay people off, and to lower costs. They only knew the buyer who mentioned this. They only knew a fraction of what the full project was. So when they got in the room with an executive and shared some material referencing that name, the executive was immediately like, how did you hear about this? Who told you this? And because the buyer that shared it with them only knew one piece of it, didn't know the full scope of it. And for the executive, they're like, we can't get, this is like a top secret. We're still planning on this. We can't let everybody know what this is all about. Now, obviously, the rep didn't know the full extent of it. But the key point is you use some additional discovery to try to figure out, what does this mean to you? Because the words that you use are really important. So that's one cautionary tale. The second cautionary tale, I had a rep on our team who spent the entirety of the sales cycle continuing to perfect this grand business case, spent hours upon hours and hours building it out after every single meeting, ended up losing the deal because along the way, in his mind, he needed to build up this grand perfect thing on his own instead of building in part, showing early ugly drafts and getting input and feedback from his champions along the way. So when he shared this with his champions, finally at the end, they're like, number one, where has this been this whole time? And number two, there are so many things that I would change here. So don't go through, and you don't want to overinvest in building something out if you don't know that it's going to land and resonate and going to be used internally. So those would be my two quick cautionary tales. So
do you recommend then ongoing coaching the champion process where it's not, I'm going to email you what you're going to need, good luck in the meeting and let me know how it goes? It sounds like what you're guiding us towards is this really high touch collaborative process in between getting the champion and getting the champion ready.
Yeah, the way I think about it is you want to start and end every conversation inside of your business case. Hey, here's what I've updated since last call. Let me know what I missed. Feel free to highlight or underscore things that are right on. Conversation toward the end. Okay, here's some notes that I made. Here's what I think this means and follow up. Are we on the same page? Okay, great. Repeat. Start and end every conversation in the business case.
Do you recommend, kind of a softball question here for you, but do you recommend a template or a process or a framework to go faster here?
Yeah, I'll chat it out. There's your framework that will significantly accelerate and speed up your process. It's called the one-page business case, and it hits all of the key components that you need to build an effective business case. But I will say, most people hear one page. Oh, this is simple. I only have to build one page of content.
Yep.
However, it's actually really hard to get an entire sales cycle, compress it down into one page. It takes a lot of thoughtfulness to say and be very clear about what do I want to communicate with the constraint of a single page.
You mentioned concise as one of the key 3 C's that we need to have. Why is that so important? I mean, if we're going into such depth, if it's an enterprise sale, if it's multi-stakeholder, talking about really intensive problems, Why is being concise and squishing it down to one page so important?
Let me give you an example from a conversation that I had with the SVP of Global Payments at MasterCard. So she has so many different projects, so many different requests and approvals. And she was like, I like to think that I'm pretty on top of it. As far as executive attention goes, I'm pretty on it. She was like, recently, I had a man follow me into the women's washroom, hunted me down and followed me in there, pitching me on a project because he had to get a word in. And if it is that hard that somebody on her own team, inside of her own company, who can physically follow her around the office, had to go to those lengths in order to grab attention and to pitch his thing, how much harder is it for an external seller, different company, to grab that attention? And so if you can't very clearly grab attention in a short soundbite, or two at most a page, you've lost the deal.
Okay. So let's say I'm an AE, I'm not doing any of this stuff. And I come to you and say, Nate, I get it. It makes sense. There's value there, but I got a lot going on. I prospect a lot of my own business. I have big, rich, thick pipeline, got a lot of deals moving on. I'm collaborating with sales engineers. I have internal meetings. I mean, this stuff it takes a lot of time, a lot of work. What's the one first step I could take in this direction? Assuming I run great discovery, like we talked about, like all of the stuff is already there. It exists. What's the first step forward in the process for me?
Yeah. First step is take the framework, the link, pick 2 to 3 high priority accounts, and then just translate and fill in the framework using your discovery notes. Your buyers, with the assumption that you mentioned, you're doing good discovery, your buyers are giving you all of the ingredients that you need to bring this together. So just start 2 to 3 key accounts that are very important to you, build out a one pager, give it a shot, share it with your champion.
I know we were chatting a little bit on LinkedIn about this. What impact have you seen this have? Not so much on the conversation itself, the structure of it, but the tone of professionalism and the authority and respect that's built with the buyer when salespeople actually run through this compelling business case process.
Yeah, this is the thing that I write a lot about. It entirely shifts the posture of the conversation from I'm selling to you to let's work together and I'll sell with you. Because ultimately it's rooted in the belief that sales reps don't close deals, buyers do. Your champions do more specifically, because they're going to be part of an internal conversation when a decision is actually being made. And so you're helping them craft their narrative in their words that they want to sell their team on. And you're just enabling all of that. So it opens up more transparency, more trust, and honestly, more proactive outreach from the buyer to you as the seller, instead of you, the seller, always having to chase down and get the next step calendared.
Got it. One other softball question here for you. Why do you think this is so hard for sales people and sales teams to incorporate? Why is it such a challenge for them to build out these compelling cases? It seems so obvious.
Yeah, well, a lot of training emphasis is very conversational. Most reps see themselves as not as content creators and writers, but as like, I'm good in conversation and I can have an engaging sales meeting. And we forget and we just don't think about everything that happens after the sales meeting internally. When we're not there, we can't see what's going on because we're not in the room.
Okay. Business acumen. This comes up a lot with sales managers I talk to, where they coach a lot on sales process and sales acumen. Where do you see the need for general business acumen? Meaning, I need to know how my customers operate and the kind of stuff to talk about so I can suss out a lot of that information. Where do you see that bubbling up to building a business case?
Yeah, I'm gonna share out a download with everybody in the Zoom chat, and I'll pull up one piece that relates to business acumen. So part of framing up the narrative is you need to think about, okay, if an executive owns a specific metric, let's say I'm talking to a CRO, obviously their goal is to increase revenue. Where business acumen comes into play is you can think about that as a very high level, it's a composite metric. There are a lot of drivers. If you think about increasing revenue, well, I can grow new sales, I can expand existing accounts. If I want to expand existing accounts, am I going to focus on renewal rates, pricing to expand existing contracts, upsells, cross sells, so on. There are a lot of different paths to one outcome. So the question is, what's the highest leverage that the executive is going to double down on and prioritize? If you don't know what drives the outcome that they are working toward, if you can't understand the full context of everything happening, it's going to be very challenging to create something that resonates. And this visual that we're looking at is called the driver graph or a driver tree. What are the main inputs that drive that outcome metric? You should try creating one of these for your target account and to try to see how it varies account by account. It looks simple when you're just looking at this, but if you actually try to write this out, and it's an activity that I have sellers do when they're trying to build their business acumen, you realize like, wow, this is a bit more challenging than I thought it was.
I love that. And it connects directly to the perspectives, the needs, the motivators of the entire buying committee, right? You're really looking at each phase of that cycle and each level of that buying committee and what do they care about? So you can start to build that out and build consensus around it. That's fantastic. So many of us work in SaaS businesses. So many of us sell to SaaS businesses. We're adamant here, Triple Session, on helping people learn as much as they possibly can to prepare for that next call. We have a resource as well. I'll put it here in the chat, completely free. It is a skill track on understanding how SaaS businesses operate. So if you're going to build that compelling business case, know how your business operates first. If you're running a SaaS business, be able to think educatedly on that. And then obviously, if you're selling to SaaS businesses, make sure you can get in there and have that compelling conversation and know exactly how to ask those great questions, understand that business model, and know exactly where that works and fits in. This has been great. As I mentioned, goes fast, 20 minutes. That's it. We have a few more minutes here to hang out. If anyone has any questions for Nate, for me, pop them into the chat. We'll hang on. We have till the bottom of the hour to run it out. If you don't get your question in time, jump into the Slack group I mentioned earlier and put the link in earlier. We have a Q&A section in there. I will field those questions today. If it's for me, if it's for Nate, I'll make sure again, I harass him, follow him into the bathroom like that example was, and make sure that we can get in and get the answer from the man himself. Nate, thanks so much. This was fantastic. Such a vital topic that we all need to do better with.
Well, thanks very much for the invite. I've been looking forward to this one, so I appreciate you asking me to join.
While we're waiting for some questions here, how about a little shameless plug here for what you're building?
Yeah, so our kind of product thesis is champions close deals internally. We need to guide their messaging. The best way to do that is through written content built with their language, a business case, in other words, what we've been going through. And so think I'm fluent as translating your sales conversations into a written business case where we just generate that content for you so that you can cut to the steps of collaborating with your champion, getting feedback and developing it out. So converting conversations into an executive level business case so that you can sell with champions.
Loved it. I watched the demo earlier today. I was captivated and seeing, and this is a conversation that has come up over and over again with me and my teams over the years. Yeah, I got all the information. It's noted. I took great notes. I didn't do it on a notepad. It's in CRM. It's recorded in Zoom. It's recorded in Gong. It's all there. But man, I have to go back and pour it all over again and put it all into my own words. And I don't have time or patience for that. And I'm not good at it. I'm not a writer. I just can't get there, Matt. And the automation piece of having it in the buyer's own words is fantastic. Looks like we got a question here. In discovery, many clients focus on problems they have within their role, department versus company priorities. How should you correctly move forward conversation and construction of the compelling business case? This is great. Towards the real priorities that will drive the sale. That's a great one. Nate, I think you're going to have a lot of great insight on this one.
Yeah, well, just the, Nicholas, I could tell by the phrasing of the question, you're thinking about how do I lead and guide a champion through the process? Typically in, the average sale, who all is going to be involved, what other business units will need to weigh in. And so what you could say is, hey, thanks so much for sharing. I'm totally tracking with why this is a barrier for you and your team right now. Typically, we see X business unit or Y role. will also weigh in. And I'm wondering, how do you think this is playing out or showing up for them? What impact does the challenge you described in your business unit have for them? And you can sometimes say, or is this something that wouldn't even affect them? And sometimes if you flip the phrasing to say, maybe they don't have any skin in the game, essentially, in this problem, that's also helpful for you to know and to call out up front. So I would be a bit prescriptive in labeling the person. Even better if you can include some account research and maybe mention a name or two based on who you know in the organization.
This reminds me both of the framework that you shared and really understanding each of those levels of the conversation and their roles and what their stake of the business is, but also what you mentioned earlier, Nate, of this ongoing collaborative process where at one phase of the conversation, sure, it's primary that you need to have that conversation with the point of contact, the person that is eventually going to be your champion, and really understanding what's their motivator, what's driving them to really take the message internally. And then as it matures, the conversation matures. And then you start to work with, okay, what's the message you're going to bring to that next team meeting? What does your boss talk about in those team meetings? What does he or she care about in terms of their drivers and their motivators? And really asking some of those questions that pull that conversation versus push it.
Exactly.
Great question.
Right on. Thanks for sharing that one.
That one was great.
Thank
Looks
you.
like we have somewhat of a quiet group here today. If somebody's thinking, ruminating, going over what they want to ask and script it, jump into the Slack group. We'll get to it. Nate, any final comments here before we wrap it up?
Sounded like maybe somebody was coming off mute to share something. So if that was you, feel free. Okay. Well, I'll just say, final thought is you try this for the first time, make quality of the message, quality of the narrative your goal. All of us as sellers have efficiency drilled into our mind. We get really frustrated and anxious when we're trying something new and we can't do it as fast as we want to. So just make quality, set a bar there. Then after you do it the second time, third time, fourth time, then you can start to say, I want to do this a little faster and faster and faster. So be patient with yourself, give yourself a little grace the first time you give it a shot.
Great advice from the man himself. We have another question here. Come in.
Yeah.
I think we're good.
Great. In terms of how to share this, maybe a shared doc so you can collaborate. Yes, exactly. So that's part of the design of our platform, obviously, but you could use a Google Doc, you could use Google or a Microsoft Office 365 Word doc, anything that is hosted online, shareable, editable. It's great.
And that's all going back into that collaborative process that you mentioned before. It needs to be something that you're working, and as you had mentioned eloquently, selling with your buyer, not to or for your buyer.
Exactly. You got it.
This was great. 20-minute sprint, a lot of great protein packed content here. A lot of great tips for everybody who's here on the call. Just get started. As Nate mentioned, first step is right there in front of you. Focus on quality, not quantity. Go use the framework that he shared. It's fantastic. Check out all of the material on his site. It's amazing. Next week is the 4th. So that Tuesday we're off.